Welcome to History and Mysteries. I'm your host, Regina Helton. If you are new to the podcast, History and Mysteries is a podcast where we talk about Southern tales, we is me, where we talk about Southern tales, Midwest mysteries, and listener-submitted stories. Some of these stories will be from my family collection of stories, and others are stories that I've researched. Each week we'll dive into a new episode, and hopefully you enjoy them. If you want to support the podcast, stick around after the episode, and there's some information on how to do that. Thanks. Welcome to History and Mysteries. Wow, I'm a little late getting this third episode up, and apologies about that. But the good news is I have 2 episodes ready, and I'll be working on a third, so everything will be right on track from here on out. So if you are a new listener and maybe you're a little bit annoyed with me for being late, forgive me. I'm sorry. Sometimes life does get in the way, and podcasting is a hobby for me, but it is a hobby that I take very seriously. So I don't want you thinking that episodes are going to be late moving forward. They're not. Everything will be right back on schedule. But yeah, I'm a human. Forgive me for my humanness. I'm excited to tell this story today. It's a rather short story, and to be 100% honest, it is one that I feel like I mess up when I try to tell it. It's better told by my older brother, who doesn't seem to be the easiest to get a hold of sometimes when you need him for story stuff. No, I'm just kidding. I just wasn't able to connect with him before I wanted to record this one. But I think, yeah, he does a better job at telling it because it's a story that was told to him. And I actually never heard this story firsthand. So that's one of the things, not to get too far off topic, that I just truly love about the podcast and about telling ghost stories is that's the thing that makes them fun, right? They're stories, and they're coming from all different directions. These stories are sometimes they're firsthand experience, sometimes they are passed down experience, sometimes they are, a story of a story of a story, and that can also be like a bad game of telephone, right? Like details can get lost and such, but I always say this, I feel like the stories that come through my family are just so consistent. Like no one really messes the details up on these. They're so consistent, and that's what makes them so believable and so scary sometimes, is there has to be some truth in there or they would get told differently. It would become like the game of telephone where, each time a new version is born. Now, sometimes there will be little variations and such, but for the most part, they're very consistent, and I think that's just what makes them so scary. Is I think they're real. So anyway, the story that I promised in this episode is about a man who could stop a clock, and this story was told to my brother by my grandpa on my mom's side of the family, who is long gone. But he was a very unique man, and he grew up in a very, just very rural atmosphere. And I feel like his stories were just kind of scruffy. One of my favorite memories of my grandpa is he would take my hand sometimes, or my arm, and he would rub it on his beard because his beard would be gruff. If he hadn't shaved for a few days, his beard would be kind of, bristly. I keep using a new word to describe it, but you're with me. And he would just kind of laugh or giggle, kind of smile, and just rub my hand on his beard. And when I think of these stories, I think of them in that way. They're kind of gritty, they're kind of scruffy, like the hairs on his beard. These stories are not told, in an elaborate storyteller way. They're just a man who grew up in rural Appalachia, and he had a story to tell. So they're not very refined stories. They're just usually short, sweet, and kind of leave you wanting a little bit more of the story. And to me, that's fun. It's kind of like I think there was a Netflix show that was like these little short, like 2-sentence scary stories or something like that. If you guys know what I'm talking about, that's the way I feel my grandpa's stories are. They're just enough context to leave you going, but wait, I want more. But they have to be real, because he would tell them the same, but they were short, sweet, and scary. So for this story, it's a story he told my older brother, and my older brother passed it down to me. So the story goes like this. So my grandpa grew up in a town. I say town, but it's a rural community, just a really small community. And there was a family in the community that was known to practice witchcraft. And if you're Southern at all, or you grew up in, Appalachia, it's kind of like, those are things that I think people found generally scary. Like, whoa, you practice witchcraft? Like that's, it wasn't like I don't think something that people took lightly. So this family was known to basically, practice witchcraft, and they could do things that I think people in the community found scary. And the story goes that the man came into a general store with his family, and he wanted to buy something in the general store, and the owner was basically refusing service because this family, was into witchcraft, and, the community wasn't feeling very accepting of that. So they were like, nah, we're not selling these people anything. They're scary, and, we just want them out of here. And the guy was like, no, I don't know what he was buying, but when I picture this in my mind, I picture like, maybe he was looking for a loaf of bread, or, some milk, or, just a staple, some kind of necessity. And so he was pretty adamant that he was going to buy it. And the owner of the store was like, no, I'm not selling it to you. And the guy said, you're going to sell it to me. And if you don't, not really like something bad's going to happen to you, but, like I'm going to show you that you should sell this to me. Like I'm a powerful person, or, I can do things that'll scare you. So the guy said, I think maybe something smarty pants was said, like, stop the clock or something like that. If you can really do these magic things that you say you can. And the guy looked up at the clock that was on the wall ticking. So I imagine like just a wall clock, like maybe, I won't put my age out there, but I grew up in like where schools, I think, looked a little kind of like old fashioned, and I can remember these like clocks on the wall, like the hands on the clock. And the guy just stopped the clock with his mind, and everybody was scared. But sometimes when my brother tells this story, he says he stopped the watch on the guy's arm. So I guess we can leave that one open-ended, but I think it would be scarier if he stopped the clock on the wall, because then everybody could see it, But if he stopped the clock the watch on the guy's arm, hey, equally as scary. I don't want to be in the same room with it. But yeah, this guy could stop time. He would just, if anything was actively going on, a clock ticking, or anything that had movement, he could just stop it with his mind. And my grandpa told this story of like this guy's stance on basically like, don't mess with me. I can do these magic things with my mind. So the guy stopped the clock, and I would imagine that everybody in the store, I imagine, in my imagination, and I always tell you guys this when I'm doing a story, is like, this is the fun part. I want you to use your imagination. So in my mind, I see like 6 or 8 people standing in an old timey like general store. And this guy waltzes in and is like, the outcast of the community kind of. And he's like, you're going to sell me something. And they're like, no, because, you have a belief system that's different than ours, or you're practicing something that we don't quite understand or scares us. So, get out of here. We don't want your business. And the guy's like, no, you're going to sell it to me. And then he shows his power by stopping a clock or a watch with his mind. And I would imagine that everybody, gasped like, whew, what's going on? And I don't know if the story concludes that he left with the item that he wanted to buy, but the main takeaway of the story, I think, for my grandpa was just that this family was just known in this community to be able to do things that were scary. And imagine growing up in this, small rural town in the mountains and community in the mountains, and you've got this family that can do this stuff, with their mind. I would imagine it was scary running into them in public. Now, I wish my grandpa was alive so I could ask him, but he's long gone from this world. But I would like to know if my grandpa was scared. Or I'd like to know if he ever met the people, or if this is one of those stories that was passed down to him from someone in his family. Or was he a little boy or a young man standing in the general store that day watching this man stop time with his mind? Was this story one that maybe, a friend told him or a family member told him? Or was this story one that he actually witnessed? And did he see this family in the community a lot and, kind of shy away from them? Or maybe he was curious about what they could do. I don't know. But I wish he were alive so I wish I could ask him those questions now as a grown-up. I think I just could hold on to those answers a little bit more than when I was a kid. But in my imagination for this story, I want to picture my grandpa as a young boy standing in the store that day, watching this family come in that was known to do things that were scary or unusual or made people a little fearful of them. And I want to imagine that the guy stopped time that day with his mind, left with his loaf of bread or milk or whatever it was he was coming in, and everybody just was quiet as he walked out. It's kind of, like a scene in a movie. He just walks out with what he came in with, and everybody's just standing there like, whoa, what just happened? But I'll never know. This is just one of those short stories that gets passed around the family, and sort of the beauty of this one is there's little variations in it. More variations than what I usually see in my family stories. This one's kind of open-ended, open for interpretation. Was it a watch? Was it a clock? Was my grandpa there? What wasn't he? Is this a story he heard in his family, or did he experience it? And to me, those factors make this part of the story fun, because this one gets to be illustrated a little bit more by imagination. And there's some of these stories that I even covered, I think, last season on the podcast. There's sort of the short little scary stories, but like I said, they're always pretty consistent in how they're told. So that's the part that makes them believable. But I've got a couple of these that are pretty open-ended, and to me, these are super fun because, like I said, I get to use my imagination. I get to imagine the scenery, the background, who was there. Was it a winter day? Was it a summer day? In my mind, I picture fall and maybe all the leaves are on the ground, and, this guy saunters into the general store and stops time with his mind. It's just creepier in fall, right? But yeah, that's the beauty of this story, is it is It is a short one, open for interpretation, and changes a little bit every time I hear it. And I also like this one, like I said, because it wasn't told to me firsthand. So I get to think about it from, I can't hear my grandpa's voice telling it like my brother can. And I just have only ever been told this story by my brother. And when he told it to me, I was like, what? I never heard this one. Like, where did this one come from? You've been keeping this one, you've been gatekeeping this one. So I think it's fun to have this perspective of my brother, and the details change a little bit. And then he has that firsthand experience of hearing my grandpa tell it. So, not the scariest story I'm ever going to tell you, but a creepy one for sure. And what do we think? Do we think the guy stopped the clock with his mind? Can you hear the clock ticking and then it just stops? Or did he stop his watch? I don't know. I can't decide. I kind of think stopping the wall clock is creepier to me, but I think if you were to witness something like that, that certainly would be unnerving. I would find it unnerving. How did he do that? And sometimes when I think about this story, there's another story that I'm going to tell you this season, which is, it's a very scary story. Like, it is very scary. It comes from my grandma. But it involved a clock. And I think I've said this before, even on the last episode where I talked about the ghost lady at the lake. There's sometimes these common occurrences in ghost stories, like a ghost around water or ghost on the side of the road that, appear and disappear. But I feel like clocks are one that are things that is like a symbol, or I don't know, a prop, if you will, that show up in some of these stories. Clocks seem to make an appearance. And think about that, a ticking clock is kind of eerie in some way. So to me, it's kind of interesting that, the clock is the focal point of what this man chose to stop that day. So that's a wrap. I hope you like this short story. I've got a couple little announcements. I'm no longer doing the History and Mysteries Instagram account. It was just a little too much to keep up with. I've decided to move all the podcast information over to my personal account and just sort of embody everything that I do creatively in one space. So I'll have to update some of the podcast info, but you can follow along personally with me. My Instagram handle is just regina.knows. You can find it there if you want to keep up on Instagram, but everything else has stayed the same. You can still go to historyandmysteries.com to listen to episodes. Right now, the podcast is available on Spotify, and I've submitted it to a bunch of other directories, so I can talk about that later. But I hope you're enjoying it, and I hope you tune in for the next episode. Thanks. I'd like to take a moment and thank you for listening to today's episode. If you are enjoying the History and Mysteries podcast, which I really truly hope you are, there are multiple ways for you to show your support of the show. You can go to the website, historyandmysteries.com. This is where all the episodes live at, and you can listen to them as many times as you want, or share them with a friend. Word of mouth is powerful, and if there's anyone that you know who you think would enjoy the stories being told, please spread the word. Also, while you're on the History and Mysteries website, historyandmysteries.com, you'll also see a button that will allow you to make a donation to the show starting at $3 a month. This is another way for you to show your support, and any donation helps to improve the quality of the show, so I would truly appreciate that. If you want to follow along on Instagram, you can head on over to History and Mysteries, that's the username, and you can stay in touch there. Once again, thank you for listening to the show, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.